Thank you very much. Thank you. Christina, shall we start with Anna's question, which I think is a really interesting one. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, Anna asks this: can giving keys also in grammar exercises, for example, gap fills and multiple choices, be a way to maximize time? I know I've got feelings on this one. Christina, what's your view?
I'm all for keys, as long as they are utilized properly.
Yeah.
As in, there shouldn't be a replacement for what is essential when wanting to give effective feedback, which is monitoring. You cannot just go, okay, here's the answer key. You got everything all right? Yeah, okay, great. Let's just move on. And most of the time, what I see in training, in CELTs and in other teacher training is like, here's the answer key. Okay, now let's do the freer practice. And you're like, whoa, what happened? So I completely agree, Neil, that it has the element of monitoring is essential. You have to go into those nowadays breakout rooms, or you have to, monitor from the back as we used to do in face-to-face. Check what are the problems. And like you said, Neil, concentrate on those issues. So what would you like us to work on a little bit more during feedback so you gain time? And then afterwards go, okay, but anyway, here's the answer key. Is there anything that I haven't mentioned that you need to work on? Okay, so an answer key is not the end all be all. It's just a small aid, but under no circumstances can it be the only way to give feedback.
Yeah, I'd agree entirely with that. I think, my heart always dies a little bit in an observation context where the teacher elicits an answer and, quite reasonably, the students say, oh, it's A, and the answer is A. The teacher says, great, moves on. Now, if it's a multiple choice question with 3 options, 1 in 3, they could have guessed A and actually have no reason why. So whether it's an answer key, whether it's whatever it is, I think we need to go on, and this is where we're engaging the students critically and ask the question, well done, yes, it is A, why? And again, I think going back to the question here, Anna, with the answer key, I would still be inclined, because answer keys tend to be following the sequence of the questions. If I'm starting with the answer key, I say, right, okay, everyone, here's the answer key. But before I give it out, I've asked the students, which questions do you find most difficult? Give them the key. Say, right, now let's go back to those ones where you had some queries, and engage the learners in that journey to understanding the answer key. Mari's come up with a really nice point about using answer keys which include wrong answers. Mari, I know well personally, and I don't know, Mari, if you feel like coming onto the mic and sharing your experience of using these. I've not done it so much, I must admit. So Mari, if you're happy to, if you can pop onto the microphone and just help us to understand how you work with these, what's the word, unreliable answer keys.
Oh, I'm a bit shy now. I wasn't expecting to come on.
Hi, Marie.
Hi there. Well, when they've actually given an answer, it worked out the answers and you've monitored, you can give them the answer key with some of the answers jumbled up or with some of the answers incorrect. And then they have to work together and work out, which ones are the correct answers and correct the incorrect ones. And you can monitor sort of to be ready to feed back on that. And it just gets them to engage a little bit cognitively, really, with the whole process. I mean, like Neil says, this idea that, what have you got for number 1, A, what have you got for number 2, B, what have you got for number 3, A, is so dire, and you've got no way of knowing whether they've actually got the correct answer correctly.
Yes.
Did they make the correct judgment when they were reading and answering the questions?
Can I ask, Mari, out of interest, when you're doing that, do you use this activity, this feedback mechanism at all levels, or do you introduce it perhaps from pre-intermediate, intermediate and above? Which is a leading question, I know. But
It is a leading question. I mean, I think probably at lower levels, the types of reading tasks that you're asking them to do don't require the same amount of interpretation as at higher levels. So I would generally, you could do it at any level, to be honest, but I generally do it from intermediate and above.
The reason I ask is that there is evidence, we know when we're working with writing and correcting writing and students drafting, it's only at a certain level, around the IELTS 5.5, I think, where students actually have enough language to be able to self-correct meaningfully. And I just wondered whether with the sort of the interlanguage system of a beginner is so skewed towards the first language that perhaps what we want to do, and again, if they've not learnt languages for a long time, their expectation will be that the answer key is correct. Maybe we need to just build up a little bit of trust and a little bit of understanding with those learners.
Yeah.
When we introduce the skewed answer key, they've kind of not going to be thrown by, but teacher's given me something wrong. They need to be trained in how to use it. And
I think you're absolutely correct with that, because the more complex the instructions for students at lower levels, the more opportunity there is for things to go disastrously wrong.
Yes.
Sorry, go for it.
No, Christina.
I mean, I completely agree. I'm thinking just right now, I'm doing a CELT with elementary learners, and it will only come through teacher training. I mean, even the communicative approach only works through through student training, because some of them are not used to that kind of methodology and they do not approve of that methodology. And I think it's the same idea of the teacher being the font of all knowledge, and then all of a sudden you're kind of disrupting that way of thinking. So it does take a lot of like building confidence and building trust between you as a teacher and the students in order to be able to do that. But then again, it's also a question of attitude. If you come right down and say, guys, these are the answers I found on the book, but I'm not sure. What do you think? And they look at you like, you're not sure, and you go,
Make it a game.
Exactly. But I completely agree with you. You have to build that trust first.
I love that idea of gamification. It's kind of like, well, let's just imagine that 4 of the answers out of the 20 are incorrect. I wonder which group, put them in groups, can find the incorrect answers first, but accurately. And I've come round to, I don't give time games. It's not who can find the answer first. It's who can find the answer correctly first, just to make them kind of ponder a little bit more. Gabby's come in with a comment which I really think is worth looking at. Now, this whole session is all about saving time and maximising the use of time. So what Gabby seems to be suggesting, which is students do the activity, and before we go into pair and go into feedback, we go into a pair check, which might seem to be costing us time. But as Christina is shaking her head, I absolutely agree with her. I think the pair check, whilst it is a time issue, actually is beneficial for learning. So Gabby, can we invite you just to explain a little bit about why you're recommending this peer check in order to achieve a better outcome and better understanding in a feedback session?
Hello?
Hi, Gabby.
I can hear you.
Oh, hi. Oh, hi. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you could hear me. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing better in the classroom than peer check, right? I mean, students learn from each other, but it's also, you see, every time you get students, you put students in pairs and you ask them to do something together, it's a learning opportunity for them, right? So, I mean, pair check, you just can't do away with it, okay? So, but you see, the thing, what I like in the classroom is a little bit of an unpredictability, let me put it like that. So, you see, I love the idea that Mary gave us with the key and wrong answers. So you see, what I like is kind of doing things in different ways. So say on some occasions you can give students the key with answers. Some answers may be wrong, some answers may be correct. On another occasion, you can just give them the key with all the answers. Then next time you do it, say my way, you put them in pairs and you only highlight the wrong answers, the ones that students disagreed on. And this is what you actually take for the whole class feedback. So variety and unpredictability works for me. Yeah, Marie is agreeing with me. I just don't like to do things in the same way, you know, and I like to keep students on their toes. So I like to do things in a different way. But pair check, Neil, I'm sure you agree with me. You just can't do away with it. It's an essential part of every single classroom of our teaching, and it's hugely beneficial for students.
And I might also add the unpredictability, the variety, but also the confidence it gives learners who may be feeling really lacking in confidence. If they realise when they've checked with their partner that there's a lot of common ground in the answers, in terms of giving a voice to that slightly less confident student, that she dares or he dares put up their hand and say, "Teacher, I think it's this one," and teacher says, "Yeah, absolutely right." And why? Oh, because the growth in self-esteem, the growth in confidence that happens as a result is almost in itself psychologically and motivationally yet another reason why that pair check, the peer check, is so important. And indeed, sometimes what I might do if there's an awful lot of uncertainty, and I don't want the focus of the class to be on me as the teacher, I will turn a pair check into a group of 4. So there's a
pyramid checking.
Yeah. So we go from pair to mini group to whole group, because students, I mean, I subscribe very much to the idea of social constructivism within language education. I don't think it should be the teacher who's always the all-knowing other. I think actually students are much more happy when they learn it from one another, which also happens to be a rationale for me for actually thinking that the bringing in the use of L1 can actually be quite beneficial. If a student can't explain in L1 at the beginning why they've chosen an answer, but they can explain it in LT, if they lack the meta language, let them use the meta language in L1 if that helps the learners to get the point and learn better as a result. We've also got a, sorry, Christine.
Sorry, no, I'm just coming in from my perspective, having taught from in non-European countries, in the Middle East, in South Asia. This is great. I mean, I completely agree with you, Neil. Pair checking, I mean, I don't know if you remember way back when we used to do lesson plan, pair checking had a sub-stage aim, which was to help students build confidence in their answers, and we had to write it in. So I completely agree, it has to be. And it's great also for when it comes to what you were saying, cutting down on the fluff and going a bit faster in the classroom. Imagine you've just given them a gist, sorry, what you call skim reading, and it has to be on the clock, and then you say, okay, go into your pairs and go and check, and they're like, we haven't finished. Yes, it's okay, it's all right, you were supposed to skim and you only had 2 minutes, it's fine, now just check what you know. So already you are not rushing them, but you're showing them that it has to be done according to a certain amount of time, and then it's okay to move on. So that's number one. But also what I've noticed is that you have to, again, train your students, because this pair checking, the teacher is not the font of all knowledge. This is an attitude we need. It's a paradigm shift for some of our students, and you have to be aware of that. And I mean, I know that in some of the centers that I've worked in, and in the Middle East, we even had pamphlets at the beginning. Is that why do we teach this way? Why is pair work important? Why? Because we had that student training was essential. So yes, we need to, but we also need to be aware that some students will not understand what's happening when you put them in breakout rooms, or they will go silent. And this is not because your instructions are bad or whatever, but it's just because they haven't understood the reasoning, the rationale. And you need to be open to your students and with your students, and explain to them why.
I think that is so useful. And I might also suggest that particularly if you are a teacher like me from Europe, going into a very different cultural paradigm, Far East, Middle East, you may actually want to introduce communicative language teaching techniques slowly. I think if you go in on day one with the full-on experience, you may well have some very confused and potentially quite upset learners. And there is there was that whole debate, wasn't there, between Harmer and Bax, between communicative language and context-specific methodologies. And it's certainly been my experience working with teachers in Africa and in the Far East over the last few months. Something I know, Mari, you've had this working with Uganda, that we have to be respectful of that CLT is just one flavor of language teaching. It's the flavor that happens to be CELT and CERT-TESOL, but it absolutely certainly isn't the only way to do it. And quite often, if we ignore local expectations of learning, then we actually risk our credibility as teachers. Can I, if it's okay, Christina, if we could just have a look at a really interesting point that came in from Marina. Marina, I don't know if you wanted to come onto microphone and just tell us a little bit about your experience as a teacher of English, and how we all make mistakes, and how actually that isn't the end of the world, and actually can be turned into a real moment of what's the word? An opportunity. I don't know if you're still with us, Maureen. I'm just looking at the list. Yeah. Okay. Hi, Marina.
Hi, everyone. For me, I was a young teacher, and it was like the first sentence I told my classes that I don't know everything. If you're gonna ask me something about medicine or sports, I will have to find information, because I do not know everything. And it's okay to have mistakes, and it's okay to find information. You don't have to know everything. Because in Latvia, where I'm working, it is very important for students to know that it's okay to make mistakes, because our tests usually are either you're right or you're wrong. And if you're wrong, you don't want to make mistakes anymore. So you don't speak, you don't even try to figure out what's the right answer. So for me, that was really, really important, that they have this notion that they can make mistakes.
And I think also, not only is it, I'm very much of the view that we want to move away as quickly as possible from a native speaker perspective. And I think it's been too long a concern of native speakers and non-native teachers, if I'm allowed to make that arbitrary divide, that one of the things that differentiates them is how many mistakes are made. We're human, we work with language. Mistakes are made because we are human, not because we're poor teachers, and mistakes are not the province of one group or the other. So I think it's important for all language teachers to recognize they are fallible. I was teaching a medical English course 2 days ago, and I put the answers of an answer key on screen wrong. Only I didn't realize I'd done it. So this was kind of, and I was like, as I looked through it, I thought, yeah, those are wrong. So what do? Just say, yeah, actually, I'm really sorry, they are wrong. Well done for noticing. What does that tell you about your language understanding? And they were like, oh yeah, ah. And suddenly they'd gone from doubting people to self-confident people as a result. They'd spotted it before I had. I think also language in itself is inherently ambiguous. And I think when we're working with tenses, if we can show students that language isn't like a light switch, it's on, off, or right, wrong. You know, you use the past simple with a time marker. Well, that's not very helpful when you say to someone, I haven't seen him so far this morning, or I haven't seen him today, or I haven't seen him yesterday. It's a real-time production language. And I think, you know, in that respect, and I'm just seeing there's more comments coming in. Mari, you're so right. My own school experience was that mistakes were bad. I love the idea that someone had the failures, further opportunities in learning. Mm. And there you are. Mari's made a typo, and I noticed there were typos in my PowerPoint. I think I had leading rather than learning. But actually, does that mean that the PowerPoint wasn't worth making? Does it mean that Mari's point wasn't worth making? Absolutely not. Let's be honest, let's be fallible, and let's use those, capitalize on as affordances.
I mean, this is something when we talk about giving confidence to our students, but also we have to allow our teachers to become confident. I'm a non-native speaker. I learned English when we moved when I was 11 in London. So, but I noticed that when I train teachers in French and I make mistakes, they barely bat an eyelid. But when I make a mistake in English, they go, and I'm like, oh, no, you don't. No, you don't. So it is about giving confidence, not only to our students, but also to the teachers. You are fallible. You're human. Welcome to the rest of your existence.
And I think that's such a key point in the training of teachers around the world, that perhaps schemes like CELT and Delta might appear to kind of put you in the framework of, if I'm not 100% perfect in everything I know, then I'm not worthy. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, if that was the requirement, I would have never made it through CELTA in the first place. So, you know.
No Delta for me.
Cool. We've had some really interesting comments coming in. I think we've got a couple more that have just come in. Another question also from Anna. Christine, I don't know if you've seen this one, but it's the second question in Q&A. Open personal answers that are all different from one another. Takes time to read them all. Students risk falling asleep. But at the same time, if you give those questions as homework and they're not checked, the students have the impression that they've worked for nothing. So I think, and if I've understood you correctly, you're talking about any activity where there's an extended open answer, but the number of students in the class are such that it's difficult to mark everyone's. Christina, how do you deal with that to make feedback meaningful and not spend an entire class looking at every last person's bit of learning?
I mean, if it is a spoken type of activity, then what you do is that when you organize your groups, you give what is called a communicative focus to the activity, which is that you don't ask them to tell each other about what they've done. So let's say an open-ended answer as to, do you like X? Okay. So instead of saying, okay, just talk to each other about it, you say, no. Talk to each other and find out if you have the same or if you have different answers. And the feedback will be not what you said, but so were the answers in your group the same or different? So that's if it's spoken. If it's written, then again, it goes back to student training and allowing them to understand the rationale behind it. But what you can do is maximize the feedback by allowing the feedback to be done maybe by the students. So again, you are building independence, you are building agency in your in your learners. And so you as a teacher go from group to group. Monitoring is key, and you identify maybe some of the points through the eyes of the learner. So that could be another way also, if the open-ended answer was written.
Yeah, I think also it's about that transparency and that honesty that we've been talking about just now, Anna, in terms of the fallibility of the teacher. So I've been working recently with teachers in a vocational college in the UAE, and they can have anything between 60 and 100 students in their class. And they are CELT teachers, so they're teaching content, but they're also teaching language. It's the integration of the two. And I've just been said to them, please stop thinking that you can and you should even try to answer and mark 100 essays. You can't, so don't even try. Be selective. I mean, you might divide your 100 students into 10 groups of 10 or into 5 groups of 20. And then you mark just 1 groups. Almost certainly, if those groups are randomly selected, you will have already a distribution of the really good students, the average students, and the weaker students. So the feedback of what they did well and the problems they're having in that 20 will be representative of the other 80 as well. So when you give feedback, think of it as a sandwich. Start with the positives. You did this really well, because feedback needs to focus on the good things for it to be motivating and for it to make the students feel, well, I've achieved something. Then look at the difficult bits, the things they did less well, and then come back to another positive at the end and a summary point. And next time they do some work, you then mark the next group of 20 and you make your way through the groups.
And on top of the sandwich, don't forget to do content and language feedback.
Yes.
Not just that.
Right. So, I mean, I think particularly as we get into EAP, but also if we're writing, you know, whether we feel that critical thinking is something that should be on the agenda of language teaching or not. We might remember Steve Hirshhorn's impassioned suggestion that critical thinking really isn't the province of the language teacher. You may agree or you may disagree with him, but the reality is that a lot of coursebook materials and also a lot of exams do expect a certain degree of engagement with criticality. So absolutely, you know, if you've asked students to develop a FCE or CAE discussion essay, you know, it's like going to the doctor. No one ever went to the doctor and said, oh, doctor, thank you for using language so beautifully. I don't know what's wrong with me, but you spoke so nice English. It's, doctor, thank you for telling me what's wrong with me and how to get better. Those essays need to reflect not just the language skill, but also the content, the quality of the argumentation. Likewise, I think when we're teaching speaking skills, don't just think about, did they use the right grammar? Did they use the right vocabulary? What about the turn taking? What about the pausing? What about all the macro speaking skills, particularly where it's working with a dialogue? Because you might have student A who speaks beautifully and student B whose language is much weaker. But if student B was the one that asked follow-up questions and listened and didn't dominate, arguably in terms of many of their communicative skills, they were more successful than student A, who could show all the right language, but basically was involved in a monologue.
Definitely. I mean, that's the idea. I mean, you have to be able to, even when you give yourself feedback, you know, you hear lots of people going, you know, they've done a grammar, let's say it was present continuous, the freer practices on the present continuous, you know, describe what, you know, X, Y, Z, and then you give just content feedback, but then you forget your language, or vice versa, which that really annoys me, because what were they speaking about? The whole aim was the speaking. Then also, but also something else in the language itself, the language feedback, let's not only concentrate exactly what you were saying, Neil, not just the negative, but let's also highlight, even when they were doing a speaking activity, let's highlight the good language, the language that was, ooh, well done guys for using this, or well done for remembering this, well done for that. So it's always also, you know, content, language, and positive, and things to work on in the language.
Yeah. Christine, I know you and I had a conversation about how we were going to approach today, and, you know, were we going to pre-script questions or not? And I think we decided that we wanted to have the kind of the freedom just to go with the wonderful comments that we're getting in from the audience. We've covered virtually everything that's come in so far, but I do hope that we can have more questions coming in. But at the risk of putting you on the spot, I know, I'm sorry.
Evil. Actually, I'm quite happy with that. Go for it.
Were there any thoughts, comments, questions that you had as you were watching the video that you wanted us to tease out with our participants this afternoon?
There's something that I like to make a kind of a connection between. You know, when you were talking about pre-teaching, I tend to, you know, but recently I've done lots of elementary, pre, and kind of like CELTs and teacher training. And pre-teaching is essential, like you were saying, for young learners. Pre-teaching is essential because, as you said, they just don't have the language. And if they were, but it is just so difficult for learners, for teachers to understand, just pre-teach exactly what is needed for the successful completion of the reading tasks, not the reading, but the reading tasks. So if you have a skimming and a scanning, do them yourself. And that's one of the big things. They always go, how do I know what to read? Well, then, you know what? Just do the task. Do the task. Listen, read yourself. Do that yourself. And then take the text, underline where you found the answer, and then in that text that's underlined, identify the words that you think they would never understood, and that is essential for the completion, because that's where the answer, all the answers are. And I think that's one of the big things, because they go, yeah, I understand I need to pre-teach only what's necessary, but how do I do it? So that's one way.
That's nice.
And also for pre-teaching, something that's nice, and it kind of, you know, links nicely to what Mary or Marie? Mari.
Sorry, I'm answering for you, Mari, here.
Sorry, didn't want to mispronounce. That's what she was saying about having the false kind of answer key. Well, a nice way of pre-teaching, because pre-teaching can be so boring when necessary, which is just match the words to the definition or match the words to the picture. No, match the word to the correct definition. You give them two definitions, A and B, and it does even work for elementary. Before I hear anybody screaming about it doesn't work, it does work for elementary, but you have to grade your language. And so one word, two possibilities, A and B, and you have to choose which one's which. Or one word, one wrong definition. You decide, actually one definition, correct or incorrect. Obviously, you need to make sure that your word in your table is in context. Do not just give a word and then, especially without an article or without, you know, to or something. So it just becomes this magical words that's been coming from, you know, the sky. No, put it in context, put it in a sentence, in a meaningful sentence with a little bit of context, with a little bit of meaning. And okay, this word, what do you think? What do you think? Do you think that's the correct definition? But make it very simple. In order to make the sentence or the definition correct, just cross out a word for elementary. When it gets higher, then it's a little bit more complex. You can do it a little bit more. But then again, it goes into, ooh, for higher level, do we need to pre-teach? So,
yeah, I mean, I'm really interested what you're saying about, you know, as you leapt in and said, oh, this works for elementary as well. Because I was going to ask, do we risk at lower levels confusing people. But I was just thinking as you were talking, perhaps an even a further refinement, that if you've got the words that you're pre-teaching in one column, and then you've got, is it A or is it B, but they're in context. If you were to take the word that's in the text and not just have the word in the text, but have the co-text from the text and then match them, then they've got kind of more contextual, co-textual clues in order to do the kind of, well, it's that one. Yeah, that would work, wouldn't it? That's interesting.
It does work. It's just make sure your instructions are really graded, make sure everything, it's hard for the teacher, because the teacher's a bit also, there's this paradigm shift also in the teacher, which is, wait a minute, don't I have to give them the right answers? And you're like, no, you know the right answers. That's why you're on this side of the board or on this side of the screen.
Right.
Let them figure it out. Oh, it's not possible. Yeah, it is. If I've done it, I mean, I have taught starters, not even elementary, starters Arabic lesson when I had just arrived in an Arabic speaking country. I had no words in, I didn't know anything. But like you said, Neil, L1, you know, their L1, the ability for them to teach with L1 did help a lot. And it is completely possible. And I'm not talking about now 15 years after, 15 years of teacher training. I'm talking about doing it at the beginning of my career. It is possible. If I could do it, it is possible.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember Sophie Coucou talking about how she has ESOL groups in Belfast where she might have 4 dominant L1s, none of which she knows, but she encourages the students to discuss this very kind of thing in the L1. And she can tell if they are generally in agreement with one another, or if they're all sitting there with furrowed brows and there's kind of a raising volume, kind of suggesting that they haven't quite got it. And then a kind of representative of the group can put together what their problem is, and then it can be worked on. So yeah, I mean, I'm a great believer in L1 specific, certainly 100% in pure L1 contexts, but I actually think we can do it in multilingual classes as well. Going back to your point about higher levels, I spent 7 years working in EAP. They weren't hugely high levels, 5.5 and above, but actually I stopped pre-teaching vocabulary completely.
I completely agree.
Yeah, I was working with students who were working within their domains, and also, with that social constructivist thing, I said, if there's a text that you don't know, check it, look it up, or ask a colleague, and they can provide an L1 translation if necessary.
I mean, this goes to what Gabby was saying in the chat. I don't know if you read this. It says, yes. What about instead of pre-teaching, just get the students to work at the meaning from the text themselves, but after the first reading. That's literally what I mean, I'm a big proponent of this, in the sense that a higher level, this should be done. And you mentioned it, Neil, in your video. Do that afterwards. Do the language work afterwards. Once they've read the text, because they have a higher level, they can deduce the meaning from the context. This can be done after the first reading. You do a little skim, or first listening, you do a little gist activity. Is he happy, unhappy, whatever? Yeah, okay. Then now, these words are in there. What do you think? Go in there, deduce. What do you think? Here's the text. Maybe even provide the transcript if it's a listening text, because it can be quite difficult to deduce from a listening. So that's the idea. I mean,
can I just interrupt there, if you don't mind? Because I think there's some really interesting points in there, because you might have seen a comment I put in much earlier about questioning this kind of framework of activate schematus, skim task, scan task, gist, specific information. And I think this is going to also link to a question that Gabby has rather interestingly, and perhaps might I almost suggest mischievously, put in about why bother pre-teaching at all. And I would actually say, Gabby, I think there is a very definite rationale for why what you're suggesting is highly dangerous. And in one word, it's scaffolding. Our students do not pay to come into the classroom to have the real world replicated. They pay to come into our classrooms to have their strategies improved and also to improve their language confidence so that they are able to tackle the real world. The language classroom should have large elements of task. But if we remove the scaffolding around the task, then quite frankly, there is no point them even being in a language classroom. So I believe passionately, it's not that there is no point about pre-teaching. There is the point about scaffolding to enable learners to become independent. And if pre-teaching is a way to enable the removal of the scaffolding at the end so that next time they can do it independently, that would be a rationale for any form of scaffolding, including pre-teaching. Because otherwise, I think we are abnegating responsibility as teachers. And I don't think any of us want to kind of be that teacher who doesn't want to help the students on the way. They have to make the imaginative leap. We have to provide them with the tools to enable them to do so. So coming back to what you were saying about doing GIST first, then doing the pre-teaching and then doing the specific information, that's fabulous because that is really highly evolved scaffolding. We are doing what Gabby makes the good point of, well, you know, they don't scaffold, we don't scaffold in the real world, should we scaffold in the classroom? So let them do the GIST task to upskill them. And then when they start needing some of that more specific language in order to be able to answer do the tasks, then do the pre-teaching and only then, and then perhaps any of the more abstruse vocabulary that's not blocking vocabulary, it's just difficult vocabulary. I remember an old mate of mine saying, well, basically, I don't see the point of doing long vocab activities afterwards. They won't remember the words anyway. I ask my students to choose 3 words from a text that they didn't know, and then I ask them to go off and they teach each other. True independent learning. But Gabby, I hope that makes sense of my rationale for, whilst I see what you're saying about the classroom wanting to prepare people from the real world, the reality is that people are paying and therefore perhaps have a duty to ease them in. We don't want to make it so tightly scaffolded that they flounder outside, but I think we do have an obligation to kind of, when we teach actually, I think it's about scaffolding strategies rather than scaffolding language.
I mean, at the lower level, talking start elementary, there's no such, I mean, strategies are I think on the realm that students cannot reach. So we start by scaffolding the language in order to help them, let's say with the receptive skill lesson. Then we can start scaffolding it. Then we maybe later on we can start, guys, you only have 1 minute for the skimming. You know, we scaffold slowly the strategies, but I agree with both of you. You know, they pay. We have to scaffold because that's what's needed. Otherwise, they will flounder. But it is true that inferring is a great idea, but at a higher level, because I feel that at a lower level, they would not be able to do this. It's they don't have the language for it. I mean, I'm talking about, you know, teaching people from Eastern Europe, talking you know, from Africa, from you know, Far East Asia. You cannot ask them to just infer, because number one, there will be this problem of, I'm sorry, why am I doing this? Aren't you going to help me? So again, there's this cultural shock that we need to deal with in a very concrete manner, going, guys, I'm helping you with this, but you still have to deduce yourself. I mean, I'm giving you the definition, but I'm not telling you which one's which. You need to do it. So there's an element of both. I think we should be very aware. And I'm sorry, I seem to be getting back to the cultural differences quite a lot, but it is something that is important because, you know, the TESOL in, you know, world and in universe is I know there's a lot happening in Europe, but there's a lot also happening in on the other continents. And this is something that, you know, I mean, that's where most of us work, at least. And that is very, very important to us.
And I think it's also something that people like me need to be aware of, because I'm sitting here with my white middle-class male privilege, and in that respect, I'm the outsider. You know, I've always been the central point. No, I'm not. Those teachers working usually in low contact, low technology, low resource, rural areas, perhaps with lower levels of English than CELT might require, who are making a fantastic job of teaching English. Actually, you're the center. I'm some kind of lucky, privileged, peripheral character. And if I don't recognize that, then actually I'm just guilty of, you know, colonialism in EFL, which I try not to be. So I think we must always bring it back to the cultural context, because otherwise, you know, it's like me trying to tell Morina in Latvia how someone in Latvia should be teaching in Riga or in Ventspils. Well, until I know the teaching reality of Riga and Ventspils, quite frankly, who am I to even begin to comment?
I mean, this is something very interesting also about this lower level of English. We you know, when we come from our CELT, it's always C1 minimum has to be, you know, we want a C2, but okay, C1 will be all right. And you're like, no, the reality is that most teachers of English have a B1, B2 level. And I'm talking as a teacher trainer in both French and English. I mean, I train teachers in French in Lebanon at the moment, where half of the population is French educated, and their level, and I'm talking public school. Private school is something completely different. Public school, I'm talking B1, B2. When I give feedback, they might not understand, so I still have to grade the language. That's the reality. And that is something also that I feel that we need to be aware of when training, and when also dealing with colleagues. We shouldn't always think, and it goes back to what was being said about making mistakes. Yeah, mistakes will happen. So what? I know some amazing teachers. They have a B2 level of French or of English, but the dedication and the passion they put in. So what? They make one or two mistakes.
Well, yeah. So what? Who do I? That's the point. You know, we're humans, and I think it's you know, thanks to people like Leon, to the people behind the scenes at Gallery Teachers, to Hedy and Gabby in harnessing a global community of teachers under the Gallery Teachers banner. That, you know, this is evidence of really high quality teacher development happening, which is not white, male, British born centric. And you know, Leon, Hedy, Gabby, Janice, all of you, thank you for that.